Hello everybody and welcome to this special event today in which we will be discussing how to deal with your situation amid the coronavirus shutdown. I'm Terry Ryder, founder of hotspotting.com.au, and my special guest presenter today is one of Australia's foremost authorities on residential property, Miriam Sandkuhler from the buyers agency Property Mavens. Now today we'll be exploring some of the scenarios that people are dealing with in the virus shutdown. For some, this is a crisis. For others, it's a nuisance. Some people are in businesses that are actually booming, and for others, it's an opportunity. It all depends on your personal situation. And how you should respond depends on whether you're a home buyer, an investor, tenant, or landlord, and whether your usual income remains intact. So let's get down to it and start the discussion. And we would like your participation, so please type your questions or comments into the chat box or the Q&A panel that you should see in front of you, and we will do our best to respond to as many of those as possible towards the end of the broadcast. So I'm going to hand over now to Miriam Sandkuhler, who is an award-winning buyer's agent and the best-selling author of a very good book on real estate investment called Property Prosperity. So Miriam, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Terry. It's great to be able to participate today, albeit under very stressful and difficult circumstances for many people. I've just had the disclaimer up there, so people have obviously had time to read it. As you mentioned, we are a multi-award winning buyer and vendor advocacy firm. So we work with people of all ages to help them buy and sell smart, enabling them to achieve their desired outcomes and seamlessly move forward into the next chapter of their lives. As you said, a little bit about me. I'm the founder and CEO. I'm a best-selling author and accredited property investment advisor and a licensed real estate agent, facilitating, helping clients as buyers and vendors. So what we're going to deal with today, this is our agenda, so you'll get to see what we're going to talk about. And look, first and foremost, I think we need to think of the human side of what's going on for everyone. I know there are a lot of people in this state where they're busy studying, they're busy getting fit, they're doing all sorts of things and seeing this as an opportunity to be high accomplishing. But if we talk about some fundamentals and what's going on for a lot of people, they are really operating out of survival. So we are here, you know, there are people who are having to consider food, water, warmth, rest, safety, security and shelter. We know the federal government stepped in to help around issues with homelessness. We know that they're helping with people fleeing domestic violence, which is elevated at these times. But just go easy. All I want to say is be kind to each other. It's an unprecedented time. Look out for each other, have each other's backs, and understand this is where we are in terms of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And don't punish yourself if you're not up here thinking that you should be accomplishing a lot at this time. So where's the market right now? Well, we know there's not only a single market, there are multiple different markets, but this is an unprecedented time. It's highly fluid and variable, but it's starting to settle down. You know, we've had federal government announcements where they've identified that they've got a moratorium to protect tenants from being evicted or rent increases for 6 months, and that's commenced from the 29th of March this year. However, we've got other states throughout the country that have all come up with their own different versions of what's going to happen in the tenant landlord relationship. So there are 2.5 million landlords in Australia's residential property market, so it's affecting an enormous amount of people. As I said, outcomes are varying on a state-by-state basis. There is no crystal ball. Honestly, prepare for at least 6 months worth of upheaval. And hunker down. It's fair to say that there are some economists who've had the views of ranging, feeling that the market's going to drop between 10 and 30% in that time. And again, it's going to be case by case. It'll depend on what your property is, where it is, what the attributes of the property are, what the demand for it is, and what the supply of that property type is. Now, technically, we can all still buy and sell. There are just restrictions around it, and sometimes they change quite frequently. I know that in Victoria we had a period of time where suddenly it was announced on a Friday that, you know, who could enter a property and how many, and what that meant was announced by the state, well, the health department, I think, and then the REIV got very quickly involved in terms of pointing out some common sense and some issues around practicality, and by Monday that had been changed and resolved. So it's one of those things where you do need to keep on top of it, literally on a week-by-week basis, and I will provide some contacts around who you can talk to about that sort of stuff. There are definitely buying opportunities, but property selection is critical. Again, A-grade properties are attracting competition, B and C grade properties are struggling to sell. What we do know is net overseas migration is in decline, and up until now it's always been a driver of capital growth, particularly in the Victoria and New South Wales markets, particularly around Melbourne and Sydney. So now that we've had that migration decline, that's going to affect demand. And in addition to that, we've had 300,000 expats return to Australia. So whilst it's absorbed a little bit of that decline, it certainly hasn't eliminated it. So what we're seeing are rents falling. One thing to be aware of is there are currently 160,000 properties under construction that are due to be completed by this year. And that's made up of approximately 2/3 of apartments and houses that were bought off the plan, and obviously being built and will be due to settle this year. Now, the implications of this are phenomenal in that if those properties come to market, if those properties are able to be settled by home buyers, but more importantly, investors who purchase them, it will result in a flood of stock coming to the market. So it's one of those things where you want to be really careful if you're a landlord and you have tenants and they need some financial relief. If you go hard at them, there will be a point in time where there are going to be a lot of vacant properties around, and the tenants will be in a position where they have the power to negotiate deals that will suit them, and people out of desperation will take those deals. So just understand this is a constantly fluid and changing situation, and where you can support tenants, I honestly recommend that you do, to generate some loyalty, because there will be more stock. And I'm aware, I literally spoke to my chiropractor this morning, and in the one suburb we were talking about, he shared with me that a property manager had shared with him that there are 70 exits about to come to the fore, which means 70 properties are going to be vacated in a very, very, very tightly, highly sought after suburb. And it's highly unlikely those property vacancies are going to be absorbed anytime soon. So just be wary of that. The other thing to know about, because the whole COVID loco thing is taking people's attention, what many people aren't aware of is there are capital gains tax changes that are coming into play effective the 30th of June this year. And it affects expats who have a principal place of residence that they haven't resided in. And the short story is that if they bought after, I'm not going to say the year because I don't want to get it wrong, but I do have a resource I can share with you. If they bought after a particular period of time and they don't live in that property post the 29th of June, then 100% of any capital gain on that principal place of residence will be taxable from a capital gains tax perspective. So that's a change that's getting lost that a lot of people aren't aware of, and that's also got the ability to bring more supply to the market as expats seek financial advice and then make decisions around whether they're going to keep their property or whether they're going to sell it. Now, with all of this supply coming into the market and this future supply coming into the market, where vacancy rates were sitting around the 2%, you need to expect that they could escalate and go upwards of 6%, which will put pressure on rents as well. So again, this is where landlords are vulnerable and tenants may in fact have the power, for want of a better word. So what are some immediate action steps? Well, while it sounds a bit basic, save money, pack it away, do absolutely everything you can to reduce debt and have a buffer, because we are now in an emergency situation for many people, and those people who haven't had the ability to do that for whatever reason are really struggling now. Again, at a basic level, I'd encourage you all to assess your budget and apply for every grant or piece of government assistance that you qualify for, just to make sure you're taking advantage of what's on hand for everyone. If you're in a depressed or an emotional state or can't manage anxiety or not coping, please reach out for help. You know, contact Lifeline, contact those organisations that are out there who are probably, in all honesty, being inundated at the moment. I have friends who are psychologists and they've never been busier. So reach out for help, it's available for you. And if you need help with budgeting and managing money, there's no shame in sticking your hand up and saying you're not coping. Contact places like My Budget. Now, I'm not recommending these people. I don't know in detail the service that they offer. I'm sure there are other organisations that can help as well. But now's the time to reach out and ask for help. So if you're not good at managing your budget, if you're in financial distress and you need help, these are people that you can contact. Now let's talk about some different scenarios. Terry, I don't know at this point if you've had any questions coming through regarding the current market situation, or if there's anything you wanted to comment on that yourself.
We have one question, which is a question that's specific to that person's situation, which we can perhaps deal with a little bit towards the end of the broadcast. And once again, just remind people who are watching and listening today that you can type your questions or comments into the chat box or the Q&A panel that we see in front of you. The reference you made to vacancy rates, Miriam, I'm just interested in exploring that a little bit. From 2% to 6%, what's the reference point for that? I mean, so I haven't actually seen prior to today anyone who's able to give any clear estimate of what we can expect in vacancy rates. I mean, most locations in Australia had very low vacancy rates going into this, and there is some capacity to absorb the extra stock coming into the market. But for example, Hobart, Adelaide, for example, was 0.8%. Their vacancies could treble and they'd still have an acceptable vacancy rate. Other markets will have different situations.
Look, again, these are estimates. It's purely linked to the fact that there's so much stock coming into the market and there's going to be limited demand to take that up. So if you've got the type of property that is in high supply and low demand, if you've got tenants who are on a month-by-month lease and you're not going to negotiate with them, they have the ability to go somewhere else and drive a hard bargain in terms of what they might pay. So look, it's not a guarantee, but I think it's fair enough to expect that where vacancy rates, particularly in Melbourne and Sydney, have been tight, and we have relied heavily on that inbound migration, that's changed. It's now a different playing field. You know, our borders are shut between states. There's no interstate migration happening anymore. The country's shut to foreigners coming in. So until that changes, there's a substantial risk that people may find themselves in situations where they've got a property that's vacant and they still have to meet their obligations, which is why I'm suggesting here, you know, in terms of landlord and tenants with jobs and their obligations, there are no changes to current lease obligations. They have to continue to be met by all parties. Just because people who are suffering from COVID financial stress are in that position doesn't mean people should be trying it on and trying to get a rent reduction at this time, because they actually have to prove financial stress under the circumstances. I recommend that, you know, maintain your landlord, tenant, property manager relationships and be kind to property managers. They are being inundated with people. They are hearing awful circumstances. Their hearts are breaking. They're trying to manage the situation for everyone involved. People on both sides of the situation are suffering, and some of them themselves are suffering. While the property manager might be employed, their partner might have lost their job, and all of a sudden their income's cut in half and they're struggling with their own concerns. So my position with property managers is if you have a job and you're a tenant or a landlord, don't contact them. There's nothing you need to do. If they need to contact you, they'll be in touch. If they need to send out a notification with some instructions to give you some peace of mind, they'll do that. They'll communicate with you. Work on the basis that no news is good news, and just give them the time and space that they need to manage the crisis in their own respect. Contact Consumer Affairs or the Office of Fair Trading in your state to get updates on situations that are affecting tenants and landlords, and there are websites that will be able to point you to that when you Google them. And the likes of the Real Estate Institute. So you've got the Real Estate Institute of Victoria, REI New South Wales, Queensland, etc. They're doing a lot of posts and updates as well, explaining what tenant and landlord obligations are too. So if you want to know information specific to where you own property or where you're living, then just go onto those websites to find out information. And contact your lender or mortgage broker for future proofing. You know, you might have a tenant who's vulnerable. You may need to change your existing loan to see if you can tap into a line of credit or an offset account. You might want to change from P&I loan to interest only under the circumstances to help your cash flow. So get in touch with your lender or your mortgage broker to see what opportunities are available for you as well. If not immediate, because you're okay, maybe for down the track when things change, or just as a backup, as I said. I know there's a lot of advice around people can tap into their super fund. I'm not giving superannuation advice, but I will say that people are better off probably tapping into equity in any property that they own and drawing down on that and then repaying it and only incurring an interest rate of 2, 3, 4%, than they are cashing out of super that's taken a massive hit as a result of the global share market crashing. And then by withdrawing at this time, you're basically cementing that loss that you may never be able to recover from in the future. So again, this isn't advice, this is an opinion. Before anyone draws on their super, please get financial advice and talk to a financial advisor about that. But if you've got assets with equity that you can draw on, then look at that as a first solution and find out what you can do in that instance to start with.
Miriam, we've got a number of questions coming through on the general topic of rents and vacancy. Yep. So we might deal with a couple of those now. Richard is asking, should we expect the vacancy rate to go up across the board, or would the vacancy rate go higher in major cities rather than in regional areas? What do you think?
Well, I spoke to an agent in Ballarat today to say how are things going at your end, what's happening from a sales point of view, what's happening from a tenancy vacating point of view. And the feedback that I got back from Ballarat was there aren't many people who are needing to vacate properties. Well, some people might have situations. I had a tenant where my tenant in Ballarat asked if we could avoid a pay increase because, which of course we agreed to, but unbeknownst to us, her husband had lost his job and she was, the sole breadwinner. So again, it's just understanding what's going on a case-by-case basis. But those larger regional centres that have got really strong growth drivers in industries that are protected, or industries like essential services, you've got food production there, you've got medical services, you've got government services. I mean, those people are employed and some industries are booming. So it's all going to be relative. I mean, it's fair to say that probably the bigger cities, certain areas within the bigger cities are going to suffer more. And those areas that have got high density of certain property types, i.e. apartments or house and land packages, are also going to be the ones that probably are hit the hardest. And then it's going to be a smattering of everything everywhere else, subject to people's individual circumstances.
It's very much a case-by-case basis. I do expect regions generally to be less impacted in various ways than some of the bigger cities, but it depends very much upon the makeup of the local economy, what kind of industries are prominent in their economy. Yeah. For example, we're getting information suggesting that central Queensland regional cities that have some impact from the resources sector, which is a sector which is doing quite well at the moment, and I expect to come out of this period with a resources boom. But Rockhampton, Mackay, they actually had an increase in inquiries for rentals, and rents are rising in those markets, mostly from people who work in the resources sectors who are fly in, fly out, or drive in, drive.
Yeah, that's right. They can no longer fly interstate. They have to cross borders. So they're literally picking up their families and moving them so they're in proximity to where they're working so that they can continue earning income. So absolutely that's happening. I've seen evidence of that too, Terry. So again, as you said, industry by industry, case by case, and then it'll come down to supply and demand and the property type itself.
Yeah. Yes, certainly. I think it's very, very important to consider the makeup of a location if you're considering buying there. For example, you mentioned Ballarat. I expect cities like Ballarat and Bendigo, for example, to be quite solid because of the type of economy. They're very diverse economies. They do have an element of tourism, which is impacted, but they have all these other things going on. And it's going to stand them in good stead getting through this period and coming out strongly on the other side.
Yeah, and look, I know I've been buying in Bendigo and vacancy rates have been so tight that landlords have had to kick out in the past tenants so that their kids could move out of home and have somewhere to live because they were just unable to find places for their children to rent. So this is going back a few months, this is before COVID-19, but that's how tight that rental market was at that time. So, when you're in a situation where you've got those growth drivers and you've got multiple growth drivers, as you'll have in Geelong and Bendigo and Ballarat and other larger cities, regional cities interstate, there's a degree of protection there, and that's what people are finding.
Yeah, it's interesting looking at the latest figures that have come through from SQM Research only yesterday, both on prices and rents. They published their rents index and their price index every week. And the latest one shows that pricing is holding up very strongly, very well.
Yeah.
We still haven't seen any major evidence of a big decline in prices based on these figures. And I think CoreLogic numbers show very similar things. So prices are remaining very resilient in big cities. But what is noticeable is that the indexes for rents are coming down. You know, on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, and now translating into annual decline. In some cases, Sydney, it seems to be one of the most effective, and that's one of those places where vacancies were already quite high, and in specific parts of their markets, particularly places like around Parramatta, where they've had a lot of construction of new apartment buildings where vacancies were 5 or 6% already before this period. Those are the ones where we're going to see some impact on rents.
And particularly, as I said, because there's more properties under construction that are yet to come to the market, those are areas that are going to escalate further. So if anyone's been in those areas and they've thought of selling, you know, maybe consider selling now, or understand that to recover with that type of property in a market that will decline, and potentially from a capital growth or an equity perspective, as well as an income perspective, you may need to wait it out a really, really long time for recovery. But again, case by case, assess your situation individually. But no, look, that's exactly what's happening. You know, certainly with what I'm buying for clients at the moment, those A-grade properties that are priced well and priced for the market, there's still competition. There are still first home buyers out there. There are still some investors out there. There are first home buyers who missed out last year when, certainly in Melbourne, the market escalated by 20% within a matter of 3 months, and they don't want to miss out again. So they're using this opportunity to work with the market conditions at the time, and there are green shoots coming to the fore of more and more buyers who are safe and do have finance and are willing to buy under the current circumstances and take a calculated risk, you know, in a position where they can take advantage of it. But again, A-grade properties are still attracting competition. B and C grade properties will require vendors to be realistic, and it may mean that they need to consider seriously accepting a capital loss. But in the future, that might be offset by any future capital gain that you make by reinvesting down the track. And again, that's not tax advice. Talk to your accountant about your own individual situation. But it's an unprecedented time, and sometimes people need to make tough decisions. And, you know, that might be one of them.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Keep your questions and your comments coming in. Type them into the Q&A panel or the chat panel. Back to you, Miriam, for your presentation.
Okay, so let's talk about landlords and or tenants without jobs. As I said, state by state, the obligations differ. Negotiation, I know in Victoria, the state government have introduced a $500 million support package, but they're leaving it to tenants and landlords to negotiate between themselves. And before a tenant's able to qualify for any package, there has to be an agreement in place. They have to show evidence of financial suffering, and obviously everyone's struggling. So it is about people actually collaborating, working together, talking out the various scenarios. It doesn't mean you have to waive rent. It might mean it's a temporary reduction but deferred. It might mean that you're happy to waive it and you're in a position where you can do that. Because remember, working with your tenants now and developing a good relationship will generate loyalty, and down the track it may mean that you keep that tenant as more vacant stock comes to the market. And if you're having to, you know, make financial amendments to yourself, there's nothing wrong with having a communication around that and just saying, look, we're both in this circumstance, what's a fair situation under the circumstances? So just talk openly with each other. As I said, contact your local Office of Fair Trading or Consumer Affairs for the state that you're in. Go back to your real estate institute websites. Certainly I know in Victoria there were a whole lot of rental reforms that were legislated to come into play at the end of the financial year in June. That's now been deferred until January next year, just to ensure that there's no further complications. So governments are doing what they can. Real estate institutes are working with government to do what they can to try and get outcomes that are fair and reasonable for each party. And there are associations, which I'll talk about shortly, that are also doing the best they can to try and help investors and landlords as well. If you don't have a property manager, then get one if anyone's willing to take your property on. Quite possibly they might not, because they're being inundated and they're working to the nth degree, but you're unbelievably vulnerable if you do not understand your legal obligations in this situation and you end up with a tenant taking you to VCAT or whichever administrative tribunal is in your state, because you'll have the book thrown at you. Now, that was always the case before coronavirus or COVID-19 came to the fore. And rest assured, if you're a landlord and you don't meet your legal obligations in relation to your tenants and you get dragged in front of a tribunal, or you can expect the book to get thrown at you twice as hard. Just a simple fact, so do what you can. I did write an article on my website under the media section with some negotiation steps to take if you are self-managing and you're dealing with a landlord, so I'll talk about where that is shortly. And again, contact mortgage brokers, lenders, get your finance reassessed. Again, mortgage brokers are incredibly under the pump as well, so be kind and gentle to them because they're stressed and working long hours. Financial advisors are working long hours. Everyone's just drowning in the different and additional work that's come to the fore because of this crisis. So it's just a time for everyone to be patient and gentle if you can.
It is extraordinary, isn't it, Miriam, just how much more work the situation's created. I actually imagined that because I can't travel, I can't go to outside meetings, that I would have time on my hands, but actually I've never been so busy. The situation has created extra workload, new situations to deal with, and I think everyone is in that boat, as you've just alluded to.
Yeah, and I look at the property managers, it's created 3 times the work. They're not getting any extra money. You know, I look at financial advisors, sure, they can charge for their time. I look at mortgage brokers, they're not getting paid for their time. They're just doing everything they can to try and help their clients get outcomes under really challenging circumstances. And then you've got banks who are dealing with an increase in loan applications or refinancing because of people's circumstances. So they're trying to obviously process them as quickly as possible, and there are time delays and lags as a result. So, you know, some industries are booming, some industries are struggling, some industries are doing more work than ever before for no extra money. It's just a fruit salad of how people are being differently affected, and so many people are just suffering in so many ways, you know, whether it's business, personal, family, relationships. It's just a really challenging time for everyone.
I think, Miriam, it's true that now more than ever before, it's a time to be accessing professional advice and perhaps be willing to pay for it as well. I think the natural impulse for some people might be to pull back and say, no, I don't want to spend money on a property manager or some other kind of property professional, but it's really the worst kind of false economy. It's really a time when you really do need to be accessing the professional help that's out there.
Yeah, because fundamentally you'll pay a price, but it's a price due to not knowing what you don't know. And as a result of that, you'll make a mistake, and the consequence of that mistake will be far greater than if you paid a professional in the first place. You know, I know as a buyer's advocate, someone, you know, doesn't like the idea of paying me a $10,000 fee, but if I've saved them $50,000 in the process, what's there to complain about? Plus I've done all the work for them that they didn't do. So again, it's understand the value delivery. So don't focus on the cost of something, focus on the value delivery and what value will this deliver to me in these circumstances. And that's why, I mean, I've got multiple properties. Under no circumstances will I ever manage my properties. I'm a licensed agent, I can if I want to, but that's not my expertise. I don't have the time or energy or inclination to want to do that to save a few bucks a month. My expertise is buyer advocacy and vendor advocacy, and that's where my focus and my energy goes. So again, people might be losing money because rents have dropped, whatever the case may be, but even under these circumstances, to make sure that you're not going to pay a penalty much higher than paying a professional, I encourage you to pick up the phone and reach out for help. So in terms of resources, I do want to talk about a couple. PICA, the Property Investors Council of Australia, that is an association for investors to have a voice on a national basis. So the membership is ridiculously cheap. It's $5, I think, a year, but they are lobbying. So PICA was involved in lobbying the Queensland government about the ridiculous and outrageous changes that they were going to make to the Residential Tenancies Act, which was totally going to put all the power in the tenants' hands at the absolute expense of all landlords. And so PICA got involved with getting their members to lobby with the REIQ to stop that from happening, and they've had some influence there. So if you're a landlord or an investor, I encourage everyone to join that association, because the more people that have members, the greater the voice we have as investors when governments start mucking around with wanting to change things, whether it's capital gains tax, whether it's stamp duty, whether it's land tax. You know, if there's an association with a voice of a couple of million people who are going to vote, then it means that landlords will have a better opportunity of not being subject to the whims of state and federal governments when they go and make silly decisions without being consulted by industry or those of us, you know, who invest and provide property available for people to rent.
Miriam, we've definitely seen the importance and the power of lobby groups like the ones you're referring to, particularly in a time like this where state governments have been kind of making up policy on the run and not necessarily thinking them through and not going through the usual consultation processes that would normally precede major decisions.
Yeah.
And the one you referred to in Queensland is probably the best or worst example of really bad policy made on the run, which they had to do a major backflip on after getting an avalanche of a backlash from the industry. But those lobby groups like the REIQ and the PICA were very instrumental in achieving that in a very short time. But it was so important to do so because landlords would have been severely disadvantaged if that had actually been legislated in Queensland.
Oh, they literally took the landlord's rights and just threw them out the window. Like, it was outrageous what they did without any consideration or consultation whatsoever. So, yeah, absolutely. That's why I'm saying log on to your local REIQ and just register for their updates, and you can be part of any petitions that they're involved on in lobbying the government to make it fair and more equitable. This CGT for expats that I mentioned about, there's a 30-minute webinar that I did a week or two ago with lady Michelle Griffiths from Tag Financial, where she talks about the tax and implications. She's a financial advisor and chartered accountant. So if you want to find out more information on that, just click on that link, or rather follow that link there and type that in, and you'll be able to find that webinar. Australia.gov.au, that's where they had a record of where the moratorium is, so you can find out some information there. This particular pm.gov.au National Cabinet statement, again, that's to do with the moratorium. The Real Estate Institute of Australia, this next address sort of down here, is basically tenancy advice. There's not a whole lot there, but it'll give you some basic fundamentals. My tips for landlords who self-manage and they want to know how to approach the situation with tenants if they're approached. I've got some negotiation tips in an article I did there last week with the Herald Sun, news.com.au, so have a look at that. And again, consumer.vic.gov.au, they've got coronavirus and renting, as will the Office of Fair Trading New South Wales and those similar institutions for each state. And again, importantly, Lifeline My Budget. If you need help with those personal matters, there's no shame in reaching out and asking for help. We all need it at some time. We all go a little bit cuckoo with what life throws at us, and we don't necessarily have the tools to know how to cope. So certainly Lifeline will be a gentle ear in listening to you, and they'll just try and give you some guidance and, again, some tools to help work through what's a really difficult situation. And it may just be talking to someone who is independent and has no opinion and is just happy to listen. So reach out there, and again, if you need help with budgeting as well. So that brings us up to questions. So Terry, I'm going to stop sharing with you and see what the questions are and how we can possibly answer them.
Never stop sharing, Miriam, particularly at a time like this. Look, we're getting a number of questions coming through which basically relate to, is this a good time to be doing something in the market, or should we wait? And Renee, for example, who's specifically looking, I think, at buying a first investment property in Brisbane, and just asking that question, should I be looking now or should I wait 6 months? What do you think?
As I said, there are definitely buying opportunities. It will come down to the safety and security that you feel you have around your own job. It'll come down to ensuring that you're finance pre-approved before you even go into the market looking. It'll come down to being clear on what your strategy is, and regardless of the state that you're in, if you want to buy, please engage the services of a REBA, Real Estate Buyers Agent Association accredited buyers agent. and only a Ryder agent, because we're the ones that have been vetted and follow codes of conduct and have got skills and so forth that are acceptable to be part of the membership, including professional indemnity insurance, all the rest of it. So look, for some people, yes, it's a good time to buy, but again, it'll come down to your individual circumstances, your budget, your job security. If you're willing to zig while other people zag, you know, I don't want to be flippant and say fortune favours the brave. It does, but take a calculated risk. Understand the things you need to consider. If you're going to buy, make sure you've got a buffer of money left over. Make sure you can tap into that in an emergency if you can't get a property with a tenant and it's going to settle vacant. These are all the things that working with a buyer's advocate, you know, a Ryder member will be able to take you through, so that then you can make an informed decision around how you should move forward. And certainly I know everyone's offering a complimentary consultation in the first instance to have a chat. So maybe speak to, go onto Ryder, look at your local buyers agents in the area, pick up the phone, make a few calls, ask them, you know, is now a good time to buy, what's happening in my local market, and share your budget and all the rest of it with them and see what they say.
Yeah. Aaron's asking a very similar question, but in this circumstance, they're a first-home buyer with a stable job, and thinking about buying in Traralgon, out in the Latrobe Valley, south east of Melbourne, and asking a similar question: good time to be buying, or should I wait to see what happens for a few more months?
Well, again, that'll come down to the specific market. So you want to look at, I don't know, do you have any reports for regional areas like Traralgon, Terry?
Yeah, we do, and it's an area we like a lot. We've noticed, and I know you have because you've been buying out there in regional Victoria, we've seen sort of Melbourne had a very strong upcycle, and then we saw it start to ripple out into regional areas quite close to Melbourne, and there's all sorts of reasons for that. Ballarat and Bendigo we've touched on, but we've seen it ripple out further, and we've noticed that there's been some considerable uplift late last year, early part of this year, in the Latrobe Valley areas, the towns like Traralgon. That economy has been very strong. It was expected that it would have an increase in unemployment when they closed down coal-fired power station.
Yeah.
But in actual fact, various levels of governments have been very proactive in investing in infrastructure and in businesses and in that area to make sure that doesn't happen. And so we've actually seen unemployment come down. It's a very strong economy. It's a bustling place, offers a great level of affordability and good rental yields for investors as well. So it's a good one to consider. In terms of whether buying now or wait, look, I really think people should be out there looking now, because as you said, zigging when others are zagging, most people are going to sit on the fence and wait. So buyers in the market are going to be precious to vendors, and you're not going to be competing with a lot of other buyers in many markets. So it's a good opportunity to perhaps snag a bargain, negotiate from a position of strength, and do quite well. But if you're targeting areas that have got good prospects for future growth, and I think that Latrobe Valley area, particularly Traralgon, which is the biggest, most important of those towns, I think have got good future prospects. So I'd be out there looking now, Aaron, if I was in your position. So
can I counter that by saying I am working with first home buyers? There are those who are brave and are actively buying, and where there are good properties, they are under competition. Again, as I mentioned before, there are people who missed out last year when the boom took off really suddenly. They're committed to buying now, and my advice is always buy when someone's going to lend you the money and you find the right property. So start now. If you're finance approved, good to go, start now, get out there, because my feeling is that in these lower price points in particular, where your first home buyers are, where the bank of mum and dad have been helping, that's the market that's going to bounce back really quickly. And again, if it's an A-grade property where it's got huge emotional appeal to a home buyer, then they're the ones that are going to be the first to recover, and they're usually always the first to recover in a down market. So they hold their value better in a down market, and they recover more quickly in an up market.
So Patricia is looking at things from the flip side. They're actually wanting to, so they've got some investment properties and they're thinking of selling something specifically in Queensland. So their question is it a good time to be selling, or should we wait? So again, I know it's a market by market, case by case scenario, but what do you think, what would your advice generally be to sellers umming and ahhing in the current situation?
Well, again, supply and demand, take that into consideration. Talk to your accountant about the tax implications of what's going to happen if you sell now. Is there a reason you have to sell? Certainly, I know people who are selling are those who've already bought. They're either upgraders or downsizers. They're committed to one transaction, so hence they're bringing their property to the market. Then there are those that don't have to sell and they're just waiting and watching. So it depends on your individual circumstances. If you're being pushed or forced to because of outside forces, then maybe you need to bite the bullet and sell. And again, it's talking to the local agent. So what you can do is ring the local agents in the area where your property is situated. Ask them about the market for that type of property at the moment. Who's out there? What are the buyers like? Is this something that's of appeal? Have a look on realestate.com and search the suburb and compare your property type to the number of listings on the market, and that'll give you an idea of stock in the market. Certainly in some aspects with what I'm buying, there's a lack of stock. That's causing pent-up demand. That means people are paying over quote ranges, and there is competition. So again, case by case, property, suburb, supply, demand will all come into play. But just to do a bit of initial research, just do that, talk to those agents, and then make some decisions from there after you've spoken to your accountant.
Okay, now Karina's asking a question that's quite specific. I'm not sure I know the answer. Maybe you do, Miriam. Karina's saying we have 2 properties with rental increases that were supposed to be starting in May. These were written into the signed lease renewal, which happened in January. Will these increases still go ahead, or are they now cancelled due to the moratorium, which says no rental increases from 29 March 2020?
Yeah.
Your thoughts on that situation?
I'd suggest the moratorium is going to take over, and any tenant who objects to it can turn around and reference that. So I'd suggest that that's a federal piece of legislation that's come into place, and that's going to take precedent.
Yeah, and my position as an investor that owns properties is it's a good time to be kind to your tenants. It's a great time to be taking action that might make it more likely that you will hang on to your tenants. And I think it would be actually a really good move to actually be proactive and contact those tenants through the property manager. So that those increases won't be happening in the short term. They can happen in the future. You're still going to be okay. But I think this would be a great, I guess you could say a political move, but a move that would be good in terms of the relationship with your tenants and enhance the chances of keeping them at a time when some people are losing tenants. To be proactive.
Yeah, be on the front foot, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Edmund, Miriam, I gather you're recommending A-grade properties rather than more marginal positive cash flow properties, and asked me, am I thinking along those lines? Actually, it refers to a question that I had in my mind when you were talking about A-grade properties, still strong demand out there from genuine buyers, but it occurred to me that perhaps some people watching and listening would wonder what's your definition of an A-grade property? What sorts of properties are in that category?
Yeah, so A-grade properties are a scarce resource. There's high demand, low supply. They attract an emotional premium. They have a certain number of attributes that people are looking for. So when I buy a property, there are 57 attributes I'll check off against the property to determine where the weighting is of those attributes to decide if they're A-grade. It'll come down to the suburb. It'll come down to the location and the pocket of the suburb. It can come down to the side of the street. It can come down to neighbouring properties. It can come down to proximity to amenities like shops. So there are macroeconomic factors to take into consideration, and there are microeconomic factors to take into consideration. Terry mentioned I have a best-selling book, Property Prosperity. You can download it off Kindle for $4, and there's a lot of information about growth drivers in there. So seriously, cheaper than a cup of coffee. Download the book, pick 20 years worth of knowledge in my brain and educate yourself, because if you're a first home buyer, first time investor, while the book's written for investors, it applies to home buyers. You want to make sure that you're going to make the best buying decision possible. You want to make sure it's not an emotional decision, even as best as you can, even if it's your first home. But you want to make sure you're buying a property that's going to have the best and highest chance for capital growth into the future. So if you want a snapshot of what that looks like, it's an easy 3-hour read. Like I said, $3.99 on Kindle. You don't even need a Kindle reader. You can just get an app for it on your iPhone and read it that way. Or you can go on my website and you know, do the old person version that Terry and I can relate to, which is the hard copy thud value book, and I'll autograph it for you. So, but that's a way to educate yourself. And again, I pointed to the website before under my resources section, webinars. You'll see some webinars that Terry and I have done in the past. So just go back down and replay those webinars. And I've spoken about investment grade properties in those webinars. And obviously, you know, that's free for you to do that, to just log on to those resources and play all of that.
Miriam, the message I took from your definition of A-grade properties is that by A-grade, you don't mean expensive and you don't mean prestige. You're talking about property that has certain qualities, and that could spread across quite a lot of different price ranges.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll give you some examples. I'm going to share my screen with you and just show you some examples of what I call A-grade properties that I've bought for clients. And I've got to find you again. Sorry, just have to share my screen. Okay, so you'll see here, once my internet decides to play, you'll see a lot of these are established property. They're not brand new, because one of the things that I'm strong on when I'm buying property for clients is that you buy for land value, not land size. And again, you'll read about that in my book, and there are videos that'll talk about that. Look, I'm having trouble with this loading up, but if you go on to propertymavens.com.au and click on Successes Buyer Advocacy, you'll see the types of properties that I buy for clients, and their budgets can be literally anything from $300,000 to $2 million. So no, it doesn't mean expensive, it doesn't mean premium, but it comes again down to the attributes, the location, what it is, where it is. And of course, regionally, you can buy really well. You know, I've bought properties regionally for clients, say 8 years ago in Ballarat, and they've had, you know, averaging 10% capital growth per annum in a regional area, which at times has been higher than what people have been earning in a metro area, given the down market that we've had. And because of a lack of affordability in metro areas, it's driving people to regional areas, which is why some of these big regional areas are performing so well. So look, as I said, have a look at success stories there from a buyer's agent point of view with your resources. You can click on best selling book to purchase my book. That's not going to show up either. But come down the bottom here to webinar and click on that link there, and that's where you'll, oh, now it's working. So this is the capital gains tax changes webinar that I spoke about. Buying in changing times. Terry, we've done that one together. Selling and buying in a changing market, 5 life stages. What's the strongest growth market in Australia? First time home buyers, upgraders, rent investors. This is the one everyone should be looking at if you're going into the market for the first time. So click on the webinar and have a play of that. And yeah, plenty of, as I said, plenty of resources there for you to have a look at. I actually have a little rate your property expertise guide. So you can click on this, it's a quiz, and it'll ask you a number of questions around your expertise and understanding of what to take into consideration with buying property. And it'll actually come up with a score and highlight where you've got some strengths, but maybe where you've got some weaknesses, where you might need to improve your knowledge or reach out and get some expert help. So that's there as well. Yeah, so, and as I said, success stories. Oh, okay, here we go. So you can see that, you know, there are period style homes in there. There are some modern homes as well. There are older style flats. So I work with a mixture of investors and home buyers throughout Melbourne Metro, as well as large regional centres. And you'll see that, you know, there are some things here that say number 2, number 3, number 4. That's because I work with clients and help them build up their portfolios to their first and second and third and fourth property. And the reason I keep talking about A-grade properties and asset selection is everything is because if you pick the right property to start with and you get that high performing capital growth, there's your equity leverage into your second one. And then that one's going to grow in your third one. So you've got your first and second all growing at an escalated rate that you can leverage into both to get your third property. So I do work with a lot of clients where they've got 2, 3, 4, 5 properties in their portfolio. So even if just your first property, you engage a buyer's advocate who's a REBA member and knows what they're doing, you know, they've actually got real estate experience and they can show evidence of years and years of real estate experience and dozens of testimonials and hundreds of reviews. Engage someone like that to help you get your first one right. So at least if you want to buy a second one and a third one, you've got some equity growth to be able to do that. So, sorry, Terry, I'm going to find this presentation in here and share that again as well. How are you going with the questions?
We've still got more coming through. Peter's asking a question: do you feel there'll be a flood of mortgage in possession sales in 6 months' time when the loan extensions expire and some borrowers remain unemployed? Will this be a big window of opportunity to buy?
Look, I mean, you're talking about distressed sales, and again, everyone's circumstances will depend. Banks are actively giving people mortgage holidays as a means of preventing that from happening, because it's not to the bank's benefit to allow the property market to crash, given they've got so much of their lending tied up in the residential market and it generates so much revenue for them. So whilst I appreciate that some people will want to be out there looking for distressed sales, so far, they're not really showing themselves. There's no sign of that happening. There's still buyer interest for certain price points and for first home buyers, as I said, because now more than ever, you know, interest rates are cheap and affordable. Regional areas are still quite strong. So look, crystal ball, I don't know what's going to happen. No one really does. Like I said, the experts are saying it might be a 10% drop. Some are saying it might be a 30% drop. I think Cameron Cusher might have mentioned 30%. But the fact of the matter is it's always case by case, you know, it's always case by case. And you know what? A bad property at a bargain is still a bad property and isn't worth buying. You want to stick to an A-grade property, even if it's not a bargain, even if you have to compete for it, and even if you have to make market value, because that's the one that's going to grow at a faster rate for you and earn you more capital growth.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the reasons why to date we haven't seen what some people expected, you know, mortgage in possession sales, distress sales, is that the typical Australian household is actually well ahead on their mortgage repayments. And that's a big factor in all this. We've been through a period of really low interest rates for a number of years, and a lot of households have used that, taken advantage of that to make extra payments. And I think typically households are 2 to 3 years ahead on their mortgage repayments, and that's a huge buffer to get through a period of time like this. And then in addition to that, you've got the major banks offering mortgage holidays for people who need it. And I've been pleasantly surprised at how few people, as a percentage of the total, have actually applied for that. Matt Common from Commonwealth Bank, for example, said that only 3.9% of their mortgage customers that they've got on their books have actually applied or inquired about a mortgage holiday. So very, very low rates of people feeling that they need that. So I think, and we've got to remember that this is a temporary situation. When we're in a crisis like this, a lot of people tend to have a mentality that we're always going to be here. We'll never emerge from it. I think we're going to emerge from this much faster than people really think. And we're already starting to relax the restrictions. The Prime Minister earlier today said that, you know, he was originally talking 6 months of restrictions, and now he's saying we're going to be out of it much sooner than that. I don't think he ever believed it was going to be 6 months. I think he was softening us up to expect
the worst,
expect the worst, and then deliver something a whole lot better, and then look like a genius. That's what politicians do.
True.
We're going to be beyond this much faster than people realise, and I don't think we're going to have the distress sales that people.
Yeah, and look, my feeling was that, and this is just gut feeling, it was, to me, it always felt like it was 3 to 4 months, and then things will bounce. It may not be a sharp bounce, but in certain sectors and price points, I expect it to be. And you've got to remember too that JobKeeper is paying a lot of people $750 a week who might be sitting at home and doing nothing. They're getting $1,500 a fortnight. And I had my girlfriend, her 17-year-old daughter, complaining about the fact that she was a casual with her part-time job and she'd worked there for less than a year, so she didn't qualify for anything. But a friend of hers was a casual with a casual job who'd worked there for more than a year, and she's getting $750 a week to do nothing. So there are people that are actually getting financial support. So again, that's designed to help them meet their obligations, survive, pay their commitments, and not be in a position where they're distressed. But it's temporary. The opportunities might be now and they might not get any better. And then, as I said, certain price points where you've got high demand, low supply, people cashed up ready to buy, they will meet the market to pay it. And if you keep looking for a bargain, you're just simply going to miss out.
Okay, Miriam, thank you for that. Now, look, it's 3 or 4 minutes to go before the hour, and we do like to try as much as we can to keep these webinars to it now, because we're mindful that people are perhaps on lunch breaks and some other things. So perhaps I'll hand back to you, Miriam, to finish off your presentation with some of the messages you'd like to leave our viewers with today?
Yeah, so like I said before, stay safe, be patient, reach out and get help if you need it. Do your budgets, hunker down, save money if you can, and then moving forward out of this crisis, for those who are living beyond their means, well, it's a good time to start living within your means and making some sacrifices and having more balance in that respect. Because we're all going through it, we're all feeling the impact of it in one way or another. And it's ironically a time where we can sit there and reassess, how have I been living? Is this serving me? Does it work for me to live beyond my means? Does it work for me to work ridiculous hours and never see my children? You know, people are questioning their lives at the moment, and also how we treat the planet. I mean, it's ironic, I'm going off track, you know, I'm going off piece, but it's ironic to see the wildlife coming back into cities and because we're not interfering with them and destroying their habitat. So there's all sorts of things going on. So just as I said, maybe do some self-reflection, maybe use this as a time to figure out how you can move forward and change your life for the better, and reach out if you need help in the meantime. As I said, we help people buy investment grade homes and investment grade properties, and we help our clients sell via our vendor advocacy service. So whether you're a first home buyer, an upgrader, a downsizer, or an investor, we can assist you. If you'd like some help, just reach out and contact us on the website. There's a little thing there for a free consultation. So again, no cost or obligation to have a chat with us. Otherwise, I can be contacted. Now, we specialise in Melbourne Metro and regional Victoria when it comes to buying and vendor advocacy, but we have interstate networks. So if you are in Queensland and you want to know which buyer's agent to talk to in Queensland, I'm happy to recommend people for you. Just shoot me an email, get in touch, and I'm happy to introduce you to counterparts in other states that I'm comfortable, who are qualified, professional, reputable, good at what they do, and have their client best interest at heart, like me.
Okay, thank you, Miriam. And I would urge people watching, listening today to get in touch and have a chat. As we said during the presentation, I think now more than ever, people need to access the expertise that's out there. It's not a time to be going it alone. It's not a time to be penny pinching and indulging in the false economy of trying to save money by not engaging professionals to help you, whether you be buyers or sellers, home buyers or investors. It's a time where tap into the expertise that's out there, and no one better to talk to than Miriam Sandkuhler from Property Mavens. Those of you watching today, I'm pretty sure you've got the impression that I've got, that she really knows her stuff and somebody that you could profit from having on your team. So thanks everybody for taking part in today's special broadcast. I found it interesting and informative. Thank you for your comments and questions. We didn't get to all of them, but please feel free to follow up if you've still got a question that you'd like answered or a situation you'd like dealt with. Contact Miriam. The contact details on the screen, or you're welcome to contact me at Ryder at hotspotting.com.au.
And Terry, if I can just share, this webinar is being recorded. I'm going to be uploading it on my website under that webinar link that I mentioned before. So if you've got friends or family who've missed out and you want to be able to reshare it, just click on that link and send it to them.
Okay. So
thanks for having me, Terry.
You're welcome. Thanks for coming on. Let's do it again soon. It's always fun. It's always informative. And I think people out there watching and listening will have found it so. Thanks, Miriam. And as I said, let's do it again soon. Bye for now.
Sounds good. Bye.